Thank you for coming along. Claire's a hard act to follow. I don't know, we'll see how we get on. We're going to talk about contrastive Chinese-English academic writing in English and how we've been working together and learning together on it. The first part of the talk I'll start. I'll introduce the Ball corpus, which I'm sure some of you I know have worked with, and look at some of the Chinese-English studies that have been done using it and implications for teaching and learning. And then Han will introduce the CH-EN Corpus and talk about some of the research that he's been doing, and then we'll come together at the end with questions and discussion. So the Ball corpus, 6.5 million words, 2,000 texts, written mostly by first language speakers of English, but also a substantial number were written by non-native speakers of English. They were chosen because they were distinctions and merits, they were good texts in the disciplines. So they're stratified across the levels of studies and across the 4 disciplinary groups. As you can see, that's the number of texts. And we have 14% of the texts were written by Chinese students and 12 of the contributors were Chinese students. The texts themselves come from over 1,000 modules and over 300 degree courses. I feel like I'm talking in 6 directions. I've got you here and the mic here, and I'm supposed to talk into this mic, and I'm looking at this stage there. So sorry if it gets a bit scattered.
The corpus is stratified according to what we identified as the 5 main social purposes of university education. Students are expected to know the latest knowledge. Exercises and explanations are good assignments for doing that. They're expected to demonstrate that they can take evidence and make an argument. Essays and critiques are good assignments for doing that. They're expected to develop research skills. The literature survey, methodology recounts and research reports are good assignments for doing that. They're expected to prepare students for professional practice. So case studies, design specifications, problem questions and proposals are good assignments for doing that. And they're also expected to learn about themselves as writers and reflect on their development. Narrative accounts and essay writing are used for doing that. So we classified all of the texts in the corpus into one of these genre families. So we've got this corpus of student writing. Anyone can use it. You can use it in your teaching. You can access it for research. But it wasn't really designed to compare the writing of Chinese students and the writing of native English speakers. And yet people have done that. So I want to show what they've done. One of the reasons that it wasn't really designed is that Chinese students are not equally distributed across the university, and good Chinese student writing is not distributed equally across the university. So if you look at engineering and business, about 30% of the assignments were contributed by Chinese speakers. If you look at history and classics, we have none. So it's not going to be an even distribution. Nevertheless, we have about 100 papers on the Ball website that have been published using Ball, and about a dozen of those managed to compare Chinese and British student writing or English student writing in different ways. I can send you this, I don't expect you to read it, but I want to just pick up 3 or 4 and look at how they did it. The first one is Chen and Baker's study, and what they did was they took some of the texts by the Chinese writers, they took comparable English writing texts from Ball, and then they looked at research articles from Flog. And they saw this sort of progression in terms of lexical bundles. So the Chinese Ball had the smallest range, referential expressions were more frequent in the professional writing, discourse organizers more frequent in the Chinese and English writing, and so on. So that's one way to do it. When they interpreted it, they sort of said that the student writing appears to be a sign of immature writing. And I kind of took a bit of exception to that, because I think a mature writer who's a student still has to write as a student, and I think it's a different way of writing from professional writing. But they did pick out some useful features and said that publishers and practitioners should put more emphasis on computer-retrieved formulaic language, but didn't give any examples how to do that. The second study had a similar sort of design in terms of the corpus. She had a collection of Chinese dissertations, journal articles, and then Ball English texts, and compared them. And she found several items that are used more by Chinese students and items that were tended to be ignored in academic English instruction. Function words, high frequency verbs, connectors. She presents really nice, sort of through structured exposure to genre-relevant samples of language use, apprentices can hone their intuitions of how certain phrases are used by expert writers and learn the alternatives by examples. And then she gives lots of examples, quite detailed teaching directions. Here's one on using make, which is a small function word but often overlooked and quite tricky, progressing from sort of consciousness raising, through rewriting, through looking at the Chinese, through to thinking of the different senses of make and how those are differentiated, and ending up with sort of applying it in authentic context. The third one looked at shell nouns, and what Nessie and Morton did was that they split the corpus into all first language texts and all second language texts, and found native students use anaphoric and cataphoric, where non-native students tend to use these signalling nouns or shell nouns anaphorically, and some redundancies. And again, they had some nice, they acknowledged that the corpus is not evenly balanced, that there isn't a comparison of genres and disciplines, but they made a case for teaching shell nouns and gave some nice activities, rewrite activities and so on, that focus on shell nouns. The last set of studies that I want to do are by Maria Leedham, and I tracked some students through the corpus, first year, second year, third year undergraduate, and looked at disciplines where there were larger numbers of Chinese students. And she found that there was an increase over the years, that the students did develop without instruction, just through the experience of studying. And she found a lot of keywords in Chinese texts referred to visuals. And you may have seen this in her book. This is a comparison of the Chinese text on the left, where they're using visuals, and the English text on the right. So this was an effective strategy that the Chinese students were using, which explained why there was more references to visuals. Similarly, more references to formulae and to lists in the Chinese text on the left than the English text on the right. So both were getting high marks, and so she said, well, really we should have more attention to teaching and working with visuals in tutoring. So she's identified that both students' language would develop naturally over the undergraduate years of study, that the Chinese had effective strategies that everybody could learn from, that the university tutors were happy with. Said the writing tutors, she said, didn't really teach them and weren't comfortable teaching them. And we're going to come back to this. We can think about where does this attention to visuals come from. So far we've got focus on lexical bundles, small words, shell nouns, visuals, lexical cohesion, genre instantiation approach, which I haven't talked about. Basically by comparing native speakers to Chinese in different sorts of developments, and then other places where they've done it, they've used the BA as a reference corpus. So the findings are actually quite similar to previous contrastive studies with Chinese writers, less hedging, narrower range of connectives, favouring certain items, idiosyncratic use. And there's some quite nice activities on small words, shell nouns, use of figures, and so on. But in most cases, the general finding, because these are all good writing, is that Chinese writers and British writers' writing is surprisingly similar. Maybe it shouldn't be surprising, but that was their finding. Just as I hand over to John, how this is accessing the BA corpus in Sketch Engine, and how you can find things. These are in methodology, recount genres, and you can find the examples across the discipline. So this was one of the strategies that was recommended by CH-EN.
Okay. Now I'm going to give you a very brief introduction for our Han corpus. Here, CH stands for Chinese, EN refers to English. Our texts are Chinese texts are from L1 Chinese students, overseas or in the BA corpus. Here, all L1 Chinese students complete their secondary education overseas or instead of in the UK. English texts from L1 English UK or in the UK in the bold corpus. And the texts are highly matched in terms of level, genre, and discipline. And they are across 4 disciplinary groups like social sciences, physical science, and life sciences. And we have fewer in arts and humanities. And they are across 14 disciplines like engineering, food sciences, biology, business, and so on. And across 9 general families like essay, methodology recount, critique, case study, across 4 levels, 3 levels in undergraduate, and level 4 is for master's level. Actually, we found this slide shows the paragraph and sentence length in Chinese and English texts. We found Chinese students, the texts from Chinese students that have are shorter in a sentence, have shorter sentence and a shorter paragraph. Actually, the text length increases by level, and you can see Chinese texts may shorter than English students' texts. Our study is focused on transition markers. There are 3 categories. This is the first category, comparison. As you can see, they are comparison like however, but, while, and so on. You can see the frequencies of the items, and according to SPSS, we got p-value and show the significant difference. You can see Chinese students may use significant more items like while, on the other hand, whereas. But English students may use significantly more however, whilst than their Chinese counterparts. This slide shows that item of consequence, like because, therefore, and so on. And this slide shows the addition category. Chinese students use significantly more and in addition than their English counterparts. Then I'm going to show you some specific items. The first one is however. We can see however occurs in these disciplines, but in Chinese texts, in English texts, there are significant more however than their Chinese counterparts in engineering, in the discipline of engineering. And we can see the position of however. Chinese and English students tend to use however in initial position, sentence initial position. But within the clause, English students use more than Chinese students, like the second example shows. But Chinese students use more however after a semicolon, like the third example shows. And interestingly, we found English students use however as a conjunction. The examples in these texts are more than that from Chinese students, as the example shows. So we see the Chinese students use however in initial position might be because the language transfer, because however in Chinese it's 然而, which always use in the sentence initial position, and we can see where Chinese use visuals, English use words. English writers may lack grammar lessons just because they use the however as conjunctions to connect it to clauses within a sentence. The next term is whereas. Chinese students use significantly more than English students in their texts. And we found whereas was used as however in Chinese texts, as the example shows, with a comma after it. So we see Chinese students might be confused about the use of however and whereas And then we have the item thus. In both subcorpora, thus was used as a conjunction to link two clauses within a sentence, as the example shows. Actually, according to the Oxford Learner's Dictionary of Academic English, we can see thus, the part of speech of thus is adverb. For Chinese students, I think the equivalent 所以 is one equivalent of thus, which is used to link two clauses in a sentence. So there might be language transfer for Chinese students. For English students, there might be lack of grammar lessons. Next item is a while. While is usually used like this. Chinese students use it more than English students. But we found while was used in Chinese text as but, as the example shows, while in fact. Actually, when we closely examined in the Lexical Bundle while in fact in British National Corpus, we found it occurs quite less. But in fact is very common in the corpus. And we can see the four positions of while in Chinese texts. Two position might be within a sentence with comma before it or without, and while can be used in the sentence initial position, and the last one shows while can be used after the semicolon. But for English students, they use only two medial position like this. For the item whilst, we usually find is okay. We usually find is in a while item, but there's a significant difference like this. We find English students use more, and they tend to express concessive relationship instead of contrast. So English favors whilst regarded by some as archaic. And there's a summary. While Chinese students tend to use more while, English students tend to use more whilst, and English students use whilst more than while. And it usually occurs in the sociology essays. There's a summary for just what I said. Chinese students may have language transfer, and they may have some confused about some items. And English students may lack grammar lessons, and the influence of teaching and context and textbooks for both Chinese and English students warrant investigation. The nature of English may be changing through English and Chinese non-standard uses.
So just to finish up, we would say that student writing is different from published research, and I think that's what the studies have shown. Writing where the Chinese students are is different from writing in the arts courses again. Findings from studies in single disciplines can be checked against the Ball corpus, like the small word study, which was for applied linguistics. Examples in textbooks can be checked in Ball. Through the study that CH-EN's been doing, we've got by comparison, we can tell that it's very rarely used, and yet in the Oxford EAP it's just presented as one of a list of transition markers that students could use. IELTS prep may help Chinese writers. I was quite tickled to find that in the preparation for describing a visual. This is a strategy that they've seemed to have carried over into their academic writing, and a very effective strategy that British students could learn from. Most contrastive studies recommend some kind of consciousness-raising activities, and a few provide some really nice activities. Some just say it'd be a good idea. And so we would welcome more studies of the CH-EN Corpus, where we have been able to really tightly match for discipline, genre and level, and to drill down to the specific differences and with teaching activities associated. There's the sources. All of these links are on the Ball website. Thank you very much.